from silence to the shot. An Ojibwa in the hell of the Great War. Can you imagine killing nearly 400 enemies and the world barely knowing your name? This is the true story of an invisible warrior, a deadly sniper, a forgotten hero. His name, Francis Pegahmagabow. He was born in the calm of Ontario's forests, an Ojibwa child raised among legends, mist, and silence. He learned to move unseen, to hunt unheard, and that silence would become his greatest weapon. From an early age, Francis felt the call of his ancestors. He listened to the elders' stories, speaking of guardian spirits, of the land as mother, of duty to the community. His identity came not from a uniform, but from his connection to his people and their history. Francis Pegahmagabow was born on March 9, 1891, in the Shawanaga community on the shores of Georgian Bay. Life for an Ojibwa child was full of challenges. Orphaned of his father at a young age, he was raised with the support of his community. He learned to hunt early, developing a patience and precision that would later astonish his trench mates. Young Francis learned to survive the harsh Canadian winters, to track nearly invisible signs, to blend into his surroundings. When World War I broke out in 1914, Francis was 23 years old. He was one of the first Indigenous men to enlist, arriving at the Valcartier Recruitment Center in August of that year. Despite facing institutional racism from the Army and Canadian society, Francis joined the 23rd Infantry Battalion. His passion for defending the land he considered his own overcame any obstacle. The journey to Europe was his first time leaving Canada. As the ship crossed the Atlantic in 1915, Francis stared at the horizon, wondering what awaited him in a war so far from his forests. At the time, many believed the war would be short, almost an adventure. No one imagined the hell that awaited in the trenches of France and Belgium. For Francis, every kilometer away from his land meant entering an unknown world. His baptism by fire came at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915. It was the first major poison gas attack in history. As the greenish chlorine crept across no man's land, Francis faced the terror with surprising calm. "The spirits protect you when fear paralyzes you," he used to say. That calm will become his trademark. While others fired nervously, Francis waited, watched, chose his moment. His company captain quickly noticed the young Ojibwa's extraordinary skills. "Pegahmagabow has eagle eyes and the patience of a rock," he wrote in his reports. Soon, Francis was used as a scout and messenger, roles requiring absolute stealth. Crossing no man's land became Francis' specialty. While other men trembled at the thought of venturing into enemy territory, Francis slipped between barbed wire and craters like a ghost. He earned his first military medal in 1916 after the brutal Battle of the Somme. The official report highlighted his great bravery and devotion to duty. Francis had repeatedly crossed no man's land under heavy enemy fire to deliver critical messages. He had also pinpointed German machine gun nests that were later neutralized. The medal ceremony was brief. War allowed no long pauses. Francis stored the medal without fanfare. The war continued. Over time, Francis developed an almost mythical reputation. German soldiers spoke of an Indian ghost lurking in the dark. A soldier could be calmly at his post and drop dead without hearing the shot. The count grew. 50, 100, 200 enemies down. Francis never boasted of his kills. In his culture, taking a life required reflection and respect. Each night, alone in his trench, he performed small rituals for those he had killed. In 1917, during the Battle of Passchendaele, Francis surpassed even his own limits. The battlefield was a swamp of mud and blood where men sank up to their waists. Under constant rain and shelling, Francis crawled to advanced positions to gather intelligence on German defenses. He remained still for 3 days in a flooded crater, watching every enemy movement. The intelligence he brought back enabled precise attacks that saved hundreds of Canadian lives. He received his second military medal after Passchendaele. General Arthur Currie, commander of the Canadian Corps, personally noted Francis' exceptional bravery and disregard for danger. Canadian newspapers ran small notes about the Indian sniper, but always as a curiosity, never granting the full recognition he deserved. In letters to his family, Francis barely mentioned his feats. "I do what I must," he wrote, "as the elders taught me." By late 1917, Francis was a legend on the Western Front. His confirmed kill count exceeded 300. His weapon was a standard Lee Enfield, but in his hands, it seemed an extension of his body. Francis credited his marksmanship to years of hunting in the Ontario forests, where wasting a bullet meant coming home without food. Few know that Francis also stood out for his bravery in rescuing the wounded. During an offensive in August 1918, with his battalion trapped under crossfire, Francis ventured repeatedly into the death zone to rescue 8 wounded Canadian soldiers. This action earned him a mention in dispatches and contributed to his 3rd military medal, an honor achieved by very few soldiers. The war's final year saw Francis participating in the famous 100 Days Offensive, a series of Allied victories that finally broke German resistance. By then, his reputation was such that officers consulted him before planning operations. His knowledge of terrain and almost supernatural intuition for anticipating enemy movements were invaluable. On one occasion, he persuaded his superiors to change an attack plan after observing details in enemy behavior no one else noticed. When the armistice bells rang on November 11th, 1918, Francis was in a field hospital recovering from shrapnel wounds. His final count, 378 confirmed German kills and about 300 prisoners captured due to his actions. These figures make him the deadliest sniper of World War I and one of the most effective soldiers in Canadian military history. Yet while celebrations erupted in Paris and London, Francis silently contemplated what would come next. Returning to Canada wasn't what many veterans hoped for. For Indigenous men like Francis, it was even worse. Despite having fought bravely for the country, they remained second-class citizens. Francis returned to his reserve at Perry Island, Waysoxing, in 1919, where his people still faced the same discrimination. The medals on his chest now seemed heavier than during the war. What good was it to be a hero in Europe if he was still considered inferior on his own land? This injustice sparked a new battle in Francis. If he had fought with courage in the trenches, now he would fight with equal determination for the rights of his people. In 1921, he was elected chief of the Ojibwa First Nation, a position he held for 3 terms. He directly challenged the Department of Indian Affairs, opposing assimilation policies and defending native rights. His letters to government officials were as precise as his frontline shots, direct and unwavering. Francis became a troublesome voice for the authorities. He openly criticized how Indigenous veterans received fewer benefits than their white counterparts. He denounced the violation of historical treaties. He demanded better education and health care for Native communities. Once, when a government agent tried to intimidate him, Francis replied, "I've seen men die for freedom in Europe. I'm not afraid to speak for my people's freedom here." His political struggle was not without personal hardship. Like many veterans, Francis suffered from what we now call PTSD. War memories haunt his nights. He found comfort in traditional Ojibwa ceremonies and in his family. He married Eva and had 6 children. He taught them both the ancestral traditions and the importance of adapting to a changing world. "We must know both paths," he told them, "to survive in these times." In 1943, during World War II, Francis was elected president of the National Indian Brotherhood, a pioneering organization for Indigenous rights. From this position, he urged unity among different Native nations and pushed for legal reforms. His experience as a veteran gave him moral authority few could match. When he spoke about equality and justice, he did so as someone who had literally bled for his country. As he grew older, Francis remained a respected figure, but was largely ignored by Canada's official history. His wartime feats faded while new conflicts took over the headlines. Yet in Indigenous communities, stories of the Ojibwa sniper were passed down from generation to generation. For Native youth, Francis represented proof that they could excel in any field without abandoning their cultural identity. Francis Pegahmagabow died on August 5, 1952, at age 61, on his Waysoxing Reserve. A warrior who had survived the worst battles of the Great War finally succumbed to a heart attack. His funeral blended military traditions and Ojibwa ceremonies, symbolizing the two worlds he had lived in. He was buried with his medals and a small pouch of traditional medicine he had always carried, even in the trenches. For decades, his legacy was nearly forgotten outside indigenous communities. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that historians began to rediscover Francis' extraordinary story. In 2003, a commemorative plaque was erected in Parry Sound, Ontario. In 2016, a bronze statue was unveiled in his honor. The figure shows Francis with his rifle and an eagle on his shoulder, symbolizing the spirit guide he believed protected him during the war. Today, Francis Pegahmagabow is recognized as a Canadian national hero and a symbol of Indigenous pride. His military feats amaze war historians, while his political struggle inspires new generations of Indigenous activists. From the silence of the Ontario forest to the thunder of European trenches, and later to the quiet yet determined fight for justice, Francis' life embodies the resilience, adaptation, and dignity of North America's First Peoples. His legacy reminds us that the true measure of a hero is not only in the battles he wins, but in the causes he fights for after hanging up the uniform. Francis Pegahmagabow, the silent ghost of the trenches, still speaks to us today through his example. The voice of the forgotten can and must be heard.